We're back.
We are back after a short break, but that felt really good.
But it also felt really long. I feel like, just to part the illusion a wee bit.
Well, to be entirely fair, we skipped last week because I didn't have time, so we're going to have to double up on recordings in the coming weeks.
You think you've got a break, and then it just means you have to do more work.
I mean, at the same time, I feel like it was nice to kind of break the routine and kind of come back to it a bit refreshed. How about that?
You know what? For anyone who, and I might be looking at my co-host when I say this, works himself to the bone and doesn't give himself a break normally, it's amazing how much more productive and happy you can be after a small break. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Point taken. Thank you. Do you want to get us started?
So here we are again, starting our third season. This is our third time starting a season, like we did last season, and I think we'll likely keep doing every season. We want to make some adjustments because we want the show to be better and stronger and always greater. Let's start off with a few of those things we're going to be changing.
As a little reminder before we get started, in Season 2, we had started listing the writer and director of each episode, and that has led us to some interesting rabbit holes. We also added a blooper at the end of each episode, and then mid to late season, we set up and launched our Patreon.
Yeah, that was a huge one. I can't imagine another step as big as that in the near future. May I also say on the topic of our Patreon, if you have joined but haven't gotten into the Discord yet, you are missing out. That place is amazing. I love checking it every day. The conversations and everything going on there is great. The only downside is people actually put spoiler tags on things, so I'm often just reading walls of black text, just wondering what I'm missing, but it's so wholesome and adorable. And of course, if you have not checked out our Patreon yet, feel free to do so at patreon.com/carryingwayward. Maybe come join us.
Do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about our changes for Season 3?
Yeah, so this was a really fun one, and I'm going to give you full credit because I think it was your idea. So as part of Critical Time, we will be adding a more distinct lore section that I will be owning. This will be our chance to sort of take the lore outside of Supernatural and tell it more as a story, and then use that to better reflect on the show. And this is going to be a chance to dive a little deeper into the lore, allow me to do a little more research and kind of work on a more of a written angle to it.
I don't want to take the credit for this because we sort of knew that we had to change this segment because the format of the show was also changing a little bit with what you bring and your talents and your training. It just felt like a natural conclusion. You know, anybody would have gotten there too. So I'm very excited to hear what you have in store for us. The second adjustment that we're going to be making is that we're going to be adding a little moment at the end of Critical Time for us to sort of reflect on the episode and see if we feel called to action in some way or another. And the goal of doing this is to showcase the rigor and reflexivity of our thinking process. And what that means is that we want to show that we're personally invested in what we're saying and discussing, and that it's not just a show, that the morals and the stories that Supernatural tells is actually leaking into our lives and how we internalize those messages.
I'm just very unsure of where it will lead me, and I feel like I'm going to let myself down, which I think is a whole other can of worms to get into. But in this case, I think it is a challenge and one that I need to accept, even if I don't think I'm ready for it.
I truly wish that our listeners could see my face because I am not happy with what you're saying. Why would you be letting yourself down?
It's just a weird in my head thing.
None of that negative self-talk here. You are going to be just fine, and that is my promise to you. I will walk you through this, no worries.
I know you would never let me down. I as scared as I am, like I said, excited. So I was wondering if you had any other resolutions, going into Season 3.
Thinking back to Season 2, my resolution at that time was to leave more room for imagination and to be a little bit more positive about the show because I was having a hard time with it, if you remember. What's funny about this is that it's actually the first step, the first discussion in the hermeneutic wager. And I can talk to you a little bit more about that at some other point, but It's basically the stage where you let go of your preconceptions and you keep an open mind to things that are new or that are old, and you try to imagine the possibilities. The second discussion in the hermeneutic wager is humility. I feel like I can use a little bit of that. In this stage, in this discussion, you're basically asked to be more reflective and reflexive, and to think not only about your strengths, but also about your challenges. You're also asked to think of the ways in which your background limits your point of view. This is something that I have been working on for the past couple of years, and it just, the beginning of season 3 sort of seemed like a good time to renew my commitment to adding a bit more humility in my life. What about you, Drew?
Well, first, I must say that I've definitely noticed that throughout the last season, I don't want to make it sound like you never were, but I feel like the positivity came through more. I definitely saw moments where, like, I expected that moment of, like, the I'm being hopeful, and you'd be like, oh, you're so funny for being hopeful. But you also, like, explain how you did feel hopeful in those moments as well, and how there is hope to be had. I had to really think back to what I had said for season 2. And I realized that it was mostly to do on the outside of the show, more of the production side, and that was my editing. And I feel that I have definitely improved. I have found editing to be a lot easier. And I also owe that to us becoming more professional at this and getting better every day. Every time we record, the sessions get easier and better. But also, I've been learning some new tricks of the trade, learning to use the software I use better, learning how to implement different tools, and just some basic skills here and there on audio editing. And I am, looking to further that this season, as we've already begun experimenting with the end of last season's editing, which I know Mary was very happy with. And on this season, the other thing I would like to really make a goal is to further my research. I feel like some of the lore sections I've gone into, knowing I didn't have as much time, or I didn't want to go as deep because I don't want to use up too much time. And now that we're kind of putting a more renewed focus on it, I want to make sure that when I'm going into these lore segments, they are more properly researched. Not to say they weren't before, but a little bit further research, a little more well tightened up to make sure I get as much across as possible in a good time frame without cramming too much, but without leaving too much space.
That sounds like a lovely resolution, frankly. I'm I keep saying it, but I am very excited to hear what you have for us in episode 1.
Oh, I'm very, like, I again, this is a great example of I already knew a lot about it. So going into it, I was like, well, how much more could there be? And I was like, there's a lot more to be.
There's so much about this. Well, honestly, it sounds like a plan to me, and it sounds like we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, then you know what we have to say then. Let's get this show on the road.